Welcome back to Real Shift, where we like to talk real shit all day, every day, all for the love of movies. I am Joe. Before I get into it, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. Any little bit of feedback or support would be greatly appreciated. Without further ado, I'm going to get right into it because today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. So, a lot of times on this channel, I like to preach about things from the past, obviously. Because in my personal opinion, a lot of movies from the past were a lot better than what we're getting today. And that doesn't have anything to do with the technological advances or anything like that. It's basically just quality. Like, in my personal opinion, movies from the past you could do more with than you can with movies today. Movies from the past, they just don't make them like that anymore. And one of those movies is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Now, this is not the first time I've seen Roger Rabbit. I've seen it many times. In fact, I grew up on it. It was one of those movies that I watched quite frequently when I was younger. But I watched it again recently, and as I was watching it, I was just pointing out all the different things that, to me, I was just like, they would never do this in a modern movie. Like, that can't be done now. This can't be done now. And I just kind of want to go through it a little bit about how unique this movie actually is and how it's kind of underappreciated for that fact. And before I do that, though, I want to point out, too, that there was, because this is what kind of spurred it on, is there was a interview done with Robert Zemeckis, who is the director of this. And he also directed Back to the Future, if you don't know that. But basically what he was saying is that there's been discussions for a while about a sequel to this movie. Now, Disney owns the rights to it, and you know how I feel about Disney, but he's basically said that there's a story in place about, it would basically revolve around how Roger and Jessica Rabbit met. So it'd be a prequel, essentially, to the original Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But basically what he says by the end of it just really kind of spurred this on and just got me to thinking, and this is why this movie could never be done now. And he basically said that, well, first he said Disney doesn't have a lot of interest in the character of Roger Rabbit, and that I believe. But he also said they really don't have interest in Jessica Rabbit. And I think what he meant by that is, given Disney's current state and who they have running things, I don't think that they could take a character like Jessica Rabbit and portray her in the same manner she's portrayed in the original Roger Rabbit. They would want to change her. They would want to make her less sexualized. They would want to probably just destroy everything that everyone thinks is memorable about Jessica Rabbit. And if you know who Jessica Rabbit is, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But that sort of character would never fit into the ideals that present day Disney currently has, because they like to portray themselves as being, more aware of things than other people, and all progressive, and how they want to include everyone, and how they want to get away from certain stigmas. So I'm of the opinion that this movie doesn't need a sequel anyway, or a prequel. I think I would prefer it just stay as a standalone anyway. I mean, if Robert Zemeckis was involved and Disney wasn't involved and they had a good story, I wouldn't say no to it either. But because Disney's involved, I don't want them to touch this property at all, because if we know anything about Disney, is they know how to ruin a good thing. So that's pretty much where this is spawned on from. Now getting down to the actual movie. And again, this isn't necessarily a review. This is just some things that I noticed about the movie that just got me thinking that this movie could never be made in today's world. The whole idea itself is just unique. I mean, the idea that these cartoon characters are basically treated as actors. They are not drawn, or they are drawn. Someone created them, but at the same time, they are actually living, breathing things, and they can interact with human characters. So we've had many movies where animated characters and real life characters cross over, but this is an actual world where that is just common knowledge, and there's actually, a place you can go that is just dedicated to toons, and it's Toontown, and basically this is where they live, and all this kind of crazy, wacky shit that happens in cartoons happens there, but you can go and visit it as a human being. And I just think that's really an interesting, unique way to kind of have this animated live action crossover, and it's not something that has really been done in that manner since then. Then you have these more basically adult, you could say, themes littered throughout it. I guess you can kind of look at Who Framed Roger Rabbit as a family film in a way, or a comedy even. But there are these adult themes littered throughout it. Most of them have to do with sexual themes. Like I mentioned already, Jessica Rabbit, or Baby Herman and his relationship with whoever that woman is that is wheeling him around. There's several instances where you get the sense that humans and cartoons sometimes have relationships in this world, and not really clear on how exactly that works. If it's actually playing patty cake or if it's actually having sex. But the point is that it's a very adult theme, and this is kind of a movie that I would assume was somewhat aimed at children. Not all the way maybe, but somewhat. So it's kind of weird to have themes like that. There's also themes of greed and corruption with the whole judge and him buying up all this property and trying to create this freeway and trying to destroy Toontown in the process. So there's that's kind of heavy for a movie like this. And murder, of course. I mean, the whole plot of the movie revolves around Roger being framed for a gruesome murder that he didn't commit. So you have all these different basically adult ideas in this movie, and it's just kind of unique. And I don't think studios would have the balls to necessarily make a movie like this with such adult themes, but still kind of market it to kids. Because you can go into this movie as an adult or a kid and view it two different ways. Like when I was a kid, I didn't necessarily understand half the shit that I was seeing. But as an adult watching it now, I'm like, oh shit, like now I'm catching on to things that I didn't catch on to before. So I just think that's really cool that it's a movie that will stand the test of time, because the movie grows as people grow. And that's uncommon for today's cinema, because typically when I watch a movie now, it's forgotten about the day after I watch it. Like there's no rewatchability there. To me, even a movie like Who Framed Roger Rabbit has rewatchability, because you can look at it a different way the older you get. And I think that's just really cool how they were able to do that. I mean, there's murder of cartoon characters, which is something that we've always thought is impossible. Like, cartoon characters are immortal, they'll live on forever. They actually come up with a way to murder cartoon characters. I mean, that is a horrifying concept. Again, I didn't exactly realize it was going on as a kid, but thinking about it now, like, that's pretty horrific for a family-oriented movie. So basically we have this relationship that the movie's kind of built on, and I think that is kind of interesting as well, in a sense that you have a cartoon character and basically this drunken private detective who hates toons because his brother was killed by one, which is understandable, but they're basically forced into this relationship, and through thick and thin, basically Eddie Valiant wants to clear Roger's name. He realizes that Roger is being framed at some point, and he wants to clear his name, and they kind of develop this relationship after having a little bit of contention to start off. So I think that is just another instance of just character development in a movie like this, when we can't get it in modern movies. In these big budget movies, we don't get character development this deep in most modern big budget movies. It's like they actually try to make you give a shit about the characters, and that is just something that is always important, in my personal opinion, for me to want to revisit movies, for me to continue to praise certain movies. You need to have characters that I give a shit about, and that's just not common either. I mentioned Jessica Rabbit already, how she's basically this sexualized version of a cartoon. It's a common thing for us people who grew up in the 90s. I mean, every comic book we read had these over-sexualized characters, and no one ever thought twice about it. That wasn't like something to get upset about. It was just how things were. I mean, certain instances, you would have like these very bodacious and very, I guess you could say, busty women, and basically you had them interacting with these men who were nothing but muscles on top of muscles. I mean, that to me is the fantasy side of entertainment that is now being lost, because people view that as either misogynistic on the woman's side or toxic masculinity on the men's side. So to see a movie like this embrace that whole concept of sexuality, even though, again, it's marketed towards families, I think that is a breath of fresh air too, because again, you could take it different ways. Like, I didn't really take Jessica Rabbit as this super hot cartoon lady when I first watched it as a kid. I just took it as she's Roger's wife and she's part of the whole story and whatever. I just took it for what it is. But as you get older, like, I remember there's a scene in Friends where basically the character of Chandler puts Jessica Rabbit on his top 5 celebrities he'd like to sleep with list, and it's because of this movie and how she's portrayed in it. Like, and it's just really interesting to see something like this when you know damn well that they could never do this and get away with it if this movie was made in present day. It should be noted that the whole reason around this, the plot of the movie and why Roger is framed, and I mentioned this already, but I'm just going to elaborate a little further. It basically has to do with a real estate deal. Now, that sounds pretty boring, to be quite honest. If you really want to think about it, like, that's a boring concept necessarily, but that's something that was kind of prevalent in older movies like this. And even, I just did a review of Chinatown not too long ago, and that has to do with like these real estate dealings to a certain extent. So there is kind of like a neo-noirish Chinatown-esque feel to Roger Rabbit, and somehow they add cartoons to it and it doesn't feel out of place. And I think that's just that mending or that meshing of basically taking different genres and putting them together and flawlessly making it happen and not making it seem forced. I think that's really creative, and basically it's not something that anyone is able to do. Like, I really commend the team with Robert Zemeckis and everyone for being able to pull that idea off, because that's not something that is necessarily able to be pulled off in an easy manner. Like, it's something that I wish people would do more. I've said this many times on the channel as well. Like, I love when people blend genres together and everything can't just be necessarily put into one category or another. Like, From Dusk Till Dawn, for instance, I mean, that movie is a crime movie to start, and then it's a vampire horror movie to end. Like, that whole shifting gears halfway through the movie is just so brilliant, in my personal opinion. Now, this isn't quite the same thing. It's mixed throughout, but I just think it's really cool how they're able to mend the genres like that. I think the biggest thing that makes this movie unique from any other movie that comes out in modern day is the whole concept of having these different properties on camera together. In this movie, you have crossover between Disney characters, you have crossover them with Warner Brothers characters, with old school cartoons like Betty Boop. You get a sense of all these different golden age cartoon characters all being able to be in the same movie together. Now, because of licensing and rights and all that, that would never happen today, because you'd have the companies like WB and Disney arguing over who gets to use this, who gets to use what, or who gets the most profit from this movie because of the characters being used in it. It would just be this litigation battle, and it would never happen because they would never be able to come to an understanding. Now, the closest thing I could think of is how Sony kind of shares Spider-Man now. And that's not really a great example, in my opinion, because I don't necessarily like the direction that Spider-Man's gone in. But that's the closest I could think of. But I just can't see any company willing to take some of their biggest characters like this and being okay with lending them to another company just to make a movie like this. I mean, it makes me feel nostalgic to see it, because this is like the only time you can see Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse on screen together. You know what I'm saying? Or Daffy Duck and Donald Duck. Like, those things can never happen now, and this is the only time you see it. So it's kind of a time capsule of that time, of the 80s, when character rights and stuff like that weren't as big a deal as they are now. But I think that's like the biggest thing that I took away from this, is just the ability to have freedom of creativity and not be restricted by different rights issues and stuff like that. So, like, that is something that I think is extremely cool about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and something that I wish we could incorporate into modern movies, so we don't have so much restricted space to work in. Like, I've always said this, creativity should not have restrictions. You should be able to do whatever you want. You shouldn't be limited by who owns what. You should be able to take a character and go to the full extent with them as much as you can, reinterpret them, do whatever you want to do. As long as you don't step on the general idea of the character and what the character stands for, you pretty much have open reign to interpret them any way you want, and that's what I think any creative person should be allowed to do. So when you have basically companies fighting over characters. You're never going to have a movie like this where they have open creative freedom to give you these crossovers that we might normally never get. So basically what I'm saying is, like, a movie like this is just, it's basically the I guess you could say it's the example that I'm going to constantly put up of a movie that was without restrictions and that was just made in a different way, and this is what we should strive to become again. I'm not even saying Who Framed Roger Rabbit is necessarily my favorite movie of all time. I'm not even saying it's the greatest movie of all time. I'm just pointing out how this movie can be a template for a simpler time in movies, and how in that simpler time these movies had more gravitas, they had more lasting impressions on people, and they had a rewatchability factor that still goes on to this day because of it. It's sad we can't have iconic crossovers anymore, all because of greed between companies, and we know Disney is the biggest company as far as greediness goes. But it's out here, and it's basically, that's part of one of the themes in the movie, which is kind of interesting, is greed. And basically what Roger Rabbit did was it talked about greed of certain big companies before it was a huge thing. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't a thing in the 80s, but it kind of predicted the whole Disney model of just buy up everything and then rebuild it in your own image. Like, that whole concept in Roger Rabbit is just so relevant to how Disney runs things now. But these are just some of my thoughts on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I hope I didn't ramble on too long, but it was a movie that I felt like I needed to talk about. Again, this isn't an official review or anything like that. If it was, I'd tell you to go watch it, of course. But this is just something that I noticed about this movie, and I think it's important for what I'm trying to accomplish with this channel, and basically preach the idea of more creativity in cinema and freedom of creativity and all that, and just making movies better than they currently are in present day Hollywood. So let me know what you think about all this in the comments down below. As always, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time right here on Real Shift. Thanks for watching. As always, peace out.